Another important story in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he would accept a demilitarized Palestinian state only if Israel is recognized as a Jewish homeland. Is Prime Minister Netanyahu making peace impossible? Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak thinks so. Former Israeli and Egyptian Ambassador Daniel Kurtzer, now professor at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, joins us from the campus to react to the crisis in the Middle East. Ambassador, thanks for joining us on Bloomberg.
It's a pleasure.
Sir, I was wondering if we might get your reaction to Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments over the weekend.
Well, he's been navigating a very difficult course. On the one side, he's got a coalition that he formed that doesn't want to recognize any right of Palestinian statehood and wants to constrain very much the Prime Minister's ability to move forward in a peace process. On the other side, he has a very determined President Obama who has made the search for peace in the Middle East one of his main priorities, starting with the appointment of George Mitchell as special envoy and the fact that the president really does want to do this. So yesterday, the Prime Minister gave a speech in which he outlined what he called his vision of peace, but it's a rather modest vision because on the one hand, he said the Palestinians can have a state, but on the other hand, he said only if they recognize Israel's character as a Jewish state and only if that state were demilitarized. He further constrained it by saying that there would be no division of Jerusalem and no settlement of the refugee issue inside the state of Israel.
And Mr. Ambassador, yes, conspicuous or maybe not so much so by omission, nothing about settlements.
No, not at all. In fact, he had some kind words to say about settlers, talking about their pioneering spirit. And as you know, the president has defined the need for a settlements freeze as a critical item on the agenda. So this is certainly one of the big gaps in that speech that Prime Minister Netanyahu gave yesterday.
The Prime Minister, in a not-so-subtle way, responding, do you think, to his meeting with President Obama?
Oh, I think this was his way of responding directly, saying to the president, this is as far as I can go in terms of my coalition, and I really can't go anywhere in terms of settlements, in terms of stopping what the Israelis call natural growth within settlements. So in a sense, the Prime Minister has kicked the ball back to the president to see what the next step would be.
Was the speech then, was Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech a step in the right direction?
Well, I don't think it's fatal. The Palestinian reaction was quite negative. Some of the Arab reaction is quite negative. And, you know, we have a tendency here in the United States to try to pick out what we can work with and see if there are some elements that can move forward. And so I would think now that the President and Senator Mitchell, Secretary of State Clinton, will be seeing what is it in the speech that might be usable in terms of our diplomacy. But frankly, the Prime Minister didn't give us a lot to work with, and it's going to take some deft diplomacy in order to make something useful out of the Prime Minister's remarks.
Mr. Ambassador, tell our viewers and our listeners how Annapolis plays into this, how that meeting during the Bush administration may in fact still have some tentacles that can work in favor of a two-state solution.
Well, in the 7th year of the Bush administration, the administration pulled together a summit at Annapolis attended by about 57 countries, and it launched negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians that, contrary to many people's expectations, actually got down into the nitty-gritty of what the two sides are negotiating about. They didn't reach any agreements, but a lot of work was done in a wide variety of committees. One of the questions that President Obama has is, can the conditions be brought together so that we can resume those Annapolis negotiations from where they left off? In other words, not to reinvent a negotiating wheel, but rather to pick up where the parties left off and to try to make progress.
And those negotiations will include the Palestinian Authority and the government of Mahmoud Abbas. They will not include Hamas.
That's correct. Hamas is still under the constraints of the international conditions in which they've been called upon to accept Israel's right to exist, agree to abide by agreements that have been entered into, and to renounce violence. And until they do so, they're not a legitimate negotiating partner, both for Israel and for the international community.
Daniel Kurtzer, professor at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, a former U.S. ambassador to both Israel and to Egypt. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.